All right, so welcome to our kickoff meeting for our virtual chat series for Keep Learning Strong. We are really excited about this campaign. Our goal here is to really promote learning and the professionals that make it happen. To promote learning and the professionals that make it happen. I would say over the course of the last few weeks, just in talking to some of our learning and development peers, one of the common themes that came up was, training is the first to go or first to be scaled back during times like this. And, this is definitely a time where training and learning should be continuous and stronger and to meet the need and to thrive beyond it. So we wanted to create this campaign to just share that message and to have learning and development professionals and business leaders to share resources and best practices. No one is an expert at handling a pandemic, so the more that we can share our lessons learned, the better off we all will be. And when we launched the campaign and kicked it off, we got a lot of feedback from the talent development community. And I just want to read a quote from Ted Holsworth, who's an HR leader, and his viewpoint on why it's important to keep learning strong. So Ted said, "We can ever stop educating, especially at a time like this. We need to share information more than ever. What is working? What isn't working? Structured education, one-on-one, questions asked in a broad audience, it's all critical. No one has faced these circumstances before, so we're all making it up as we go along. And if we stop the learning process, the results could be disastrous." So again, we invite you to join the conversation, join the movement as we promote learning. You can find us at Enovation Solutions at hashtag Keep Learning Strong on LinkedIn. We're also having the conversations on Twitter with the same hashtag. And we have a page that we would love for you to join just to keep in touch on all the things that we're doing as we talk to amazing leaders and business leaders and L&D leaders around what they're doing. So you can join us there at the website. And so before we get into our speaker, who I'm really excited to interview, I just wanted to introduce you to myself and our host, Roger Rinker. So I'm Candice McGlen. I'm a learning solutions consultant with Enovation Solutions. My passion is around talent development and really just removing barriers to performance and learning within organizations and amongst individuals. And I'll let Roger introduce himself.
Yeah, Roger Rinker, very nice to meet you all virtually, as we're doing a lot these days. 30 years as HR leader for a couple of large global organizations. My passion within the HR scope is online learning, and then drilling down even another level. I have a strong passion with regards to employee development. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit about me, and I'll hand it back over to Candice.
Perfect. Thank you, Roger. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sofian Lamali, who's the Global Head of Leadership Development with SABIC. And if you had a chance to follow him, and hopefully you will on LinkedIn, he has some really great content that he shares around learning and development and the talent community. And part of this mini chat that we are doing, we've asked for individuals to share their quotes and things that are important to them around learning. And I think this quote from Martin Luther King is a really powerful one. So thank you, Sofian, and we'll get straight into it.
Yeah.
So thank you again for joining us. And if you'd like to just share a little bit about yourself and your role at your organization.
Sure. Thank you, Candice and Roger, for having me with you. I'm very excited to be with you. So I'm on distance here. So I'm based in Riyadh. I'm the global head of leadership development for SABIC. SABIC is a global chemical company. It's a 50 billion company, a $50 billion company. It has about 35,000 employees worldwide. We are operating more than 50 different countries. We are known as the third biggest chemical organization in the world, and our ambition is to become number one. The unique thing about us is we are headquartered in the Middle East, in the Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, and it's quite unique, and it brings some unique dynamics in terms of cultural intelligence, I would say. I will elaborate a bit more about this. A few about me. I grew up in France. I started my career there. I've been in HR for 15 years now, in a variety of roles in global energy companies. My passion obviously is really about developing people. Recently, probably the last 7 years, I've been focused on enabling leaders. And what I mean by enabling leaders is not only the executive leaders, but in my company, we believe that everyone is a leader. And we believe that everyone needs to display leadership and need to influence and be role model in terms of behavior. So my role is really to help employees, people actually even outside my organization, really achieve their full potential. And as such, I also teach in a variety of business schools. And I really like to engage with students, but also on executive education with very senior executives.
Perfect. Thank you again. And so getting right into the questions. So we're talking about this Keep Learning Strong campaign and what it means. But when you hear that, what does it mean to you, and why is it important in your view?
Well, I mean, first, I really like this motto, "Keep Learning Strong." I think it's very inspiring, and it's very timely, I would say. The very first thing I would like to share as my view on this topic, which is that learning is not only about training. Well, that is well known that learning is not only about training. What I also mean here is learning is not only about, L&D driven interventions. Learning happens every day. Whenever you listen to a podcast, you are on LinkedIn, you talk on WhatsApp, you watch a video, you are learning anyway. And for me, learning is broader than just, getting new content, but learning nowadays for me during the COVID means, making sense of what's going on in the world, because there's so much going on. And for me, those who are learning are those who are really trying to observe what's going on outside, but also within themselves, and making sense of it and really transforming or changing the way they think, the way they feel their own emotions, and the way they act. So for me, Keep Learning Strong is very inspiring. I would say nowadays, at the risk of not being very original, COVID-19 is bringing us some challenges, and for me, it's a survival mechanism. Like, we either learn or we completely lose. So I think it's very important that organizations, but also individuals, reflect on the history, what they've been doing for the last years, and is it still relevant for the future or for the present?
Yes, that's great. Lots of learning. I like that you said it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah, very much.
So pass on to Roger.
Yeah, thank you. And I hadn't quite heard it referred to as the COVID yet, so I think I may steal that from you. That's a good one. It's always been awkward to describe for me, but I think that kind of hits the nail on the head. And I loved what you said about we're all kind of in this, right? And this is new, and this is pushing the boundaries with regards to learning in organizations for both the companies as well as the employees. So thank you for your thoughts there. And getting just a little bit deeper into that, wanted to ask you, how is the speed of change impacting your organization's learning agenda? What has changed over the last 2 to 3 months? Has anything changed? And and how are you going about that?
Yeah, I guess like many organizations, we are highly impacted, but I would say much more positively than anything else. Um, for us, we really had to sit together and look at what we're doing and is it still relevant. And it also brings a nice feeling that you don't have the solutions and that you can try everything almost. So that was the kind of positive side within that. So for us, we're probably quite unique in my organization, but these this crisis is bringing more learning to us and much more work. We are much more busy than we used to be, and we were already busy, but now it's just we feel like there's a tailwind, and the things we've been doing for many years that we're trying to push to the business are now landing in the right place because people are much more willing to consider online because they don't have any choice. So for us, in terms of pace and intensity, it's been a huge increase. And it's been also a change, not only an increase, a change in the way we do things. Obviously, we went digital on many of the things we were doing. Initially, maybe we ourselves as L&D leaders, but also the business, were kind of reluctant to look at digital options. Maybe we're not ready. Maybe we believe that sometimes face-to-face is much more impactful. But now, basically, around 40% of my portfolio in executive leadership development has gone global. The things that we believe are still relevant to have face-to-face have been delayed to hopefully the end of the year. Things are much quicker, faster. We are basically creating a lot of new webinars to support the leaders during the crisis. So over the next 3-4 months, and we already started, we're going to push some curated content to all leaders and to our HR professionals as well, because what we feel is people really need support from L&D professionals. And sometimes because of the distance, they are not really reaching out to say, I need help. But when you start opening that conversation with them, you realize that they really need some help in terms of content, of insights, of guidance, etc. And maybe the last thing that is changing is the topics we are addressing. In my field, it's all about leadership. So it's all about business, strategic leadership, people-related leadership, and also kind of self-leadership, how you manage your emotions, etc. But more and more, we are bringing topics like well-being, like energy management, because this crisis is bringing a lot of challenges. A lot of us have personal situations at home with kids or with elderly parents, and working on this is not being able to engage with our teams is also quite difficult for us. So I would say, yeah, it's much more quicker, faster, and different, and more digital.
Great, thank you. Those were some very thoughtful answers, and appreciate those sharing with us, Sofian. Great. So I think you may have answered it a little bit in your previous answer, but any more detail with regards to navigating through different challenges thus far? Any mitigation efforts maybe you've had to work through? And how has your learning supported, some of the efforts that your company's gone through over the last few months?
Yeah, I guess this one is an interesting one because we don't know the future, right? We don't know how this COVID is going to evolve. So our challenge initially was to find the right balance between quickly moving to actions and to radical actions versus just ignoring things and keep doing the same thing. So my view was to say, hey, let's adapt very quickly on things that need to be adapted quickly, and on things that can be somehow postponed, let's just postpone them for the moment and let's see how this goes. Because there's a lot of hype about the new normal, everything is going to be digital, etc. I still believe that there's a lot of things that need to stay the same because they bring the best impact. So what we've done to mitigate this is really to look at scenario planning, just like you do in strategic planning. We looked at the scenario planning with the strategy, with the COVID, and say, well, what are the potential scenarios or ways this is going to evolve? And based on that, we have created an action plan for each of the scenarios. What we are busy at the moment is to look at how the situation is evolving. And based on that, we are ready to move to more action. So we're moving gradually. We already postponed a lot of efforts. We've already digitalized a lot of things. We added a lot to our portfolio to offer some digital. But there are things where we still don't know, and we have to live with the fact that we don't know. And that's quite challenging, emotionally challenging, that, well, we need to do some action, but we don't know what to do. Let's just wait and let's just see. What we've done, as I said, is really some specific learning for that crisis. Our portfolio is really broad in terms of leadership, but staying relevant was key for us. So we really had to look at, okay, let's just pause the content that we typically have, and let's look at what is relevant for the next 3 months, because the next 9 months seems very too long for us, and we really need to focus now. So finding the right balance is quite challenging.
Totally agree. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Candice, back to you.
Thank you. So you sort of touched on it in terms of distance learning, but what does successful distance learning look like in your organization?
Yeah, so first, we've always had a portfolio of distance learning. The thing is, very few people were really jumping into the digital because they were not forced to. So we had a mass available content library that we enable for all our employees. And that is really curated content that is based on our competencies and that ensures their needs, whether it's functional learning or it's learning more related to core skills or soft skills and leadership. That's always been available, and now we are just promoting this a bit more. And what we saw already is that there is a huge increase in utilization of those resources. So that's great to see. What we also have in addition to that is very targeted learning databases for professionals. So for example, if you are in the L&D space, right, you may need some much more specific learning related to your field as an L&D leader. If you're a chemical engineer in the petrochemical industry, there are a lot of databases or providers of content that could provide some very unique content to you. So we have been partnering with many of those companies historically, and we are enabling that. And what we've also saw with those providers is that they are also adapting very quickly. So they're also curating more content that matters to us at the moment. What we also promote a lot is not just content, but social learning. To ensure social learning, you need to have the right technology. And that's, I'm going to elaborate more, a bit more about this, but that's been a challenge because the technologies that are available in the market were probably not equipped for that huge scale up in terms of their capacity. And that brings its own challenges. But what we've done is we've increased the capacity very quickly with our IT department of all the platforms we have to talk with each other, use Skype Business, etc. And because we are a big company, we also need to make sure we are having some security, IT security guarantees with each of the platforms we're using. So that's a bit of the back and forth discussion we have with our IT department. In addition to that, I think we need to provide some space for self-reflection. That's not necessarily about pushing content, but it's about us as HR showing some flexibility for people to really have the right time to reflect. I think it's extremely important that all leaders are able to reflect during those times. So what we have implemented is flexible working hours, and by doing so, what we want to avoid is having leaders on back-to-back meetings and sitting in a chair for 8 hours without any pause. That is not really good for learning. So what we really encourage is for all employees to have some time to spend time with family, take a break, take a pause, etc. And that has been quite useful for us.
That's great. It sounds like you all have been able to implement some really helpful changes where you're seeing some of the results of that. Have you had any challenges with some of your workforce not being able to access distance learning?
So not really in terms of access to it, but in terms of appetite to it, right? We have a workforce of 35,000 people. Some people are operators. Some people do not really have the usual habit of looking for more content on the evenings, and that's very acceptable. So pushing learning to people who are not necessarily very used to be kind of lifelong learners has been a bit of a challenge, and I'm not saying that we have overcome this challenge yet. I think we still need to do much more on this. Sometimes there is some language challenges because most of what we do is in English, and for some populations, for some of our employees, though they speak English on a daily basis, having heavy content on a different language could be a challenge. So we have some translated content or content within languages, which are the main languages for us will be Arabic, Hindi, Spanish, and Portuguese. So we have a bit, but probably we haven't done enough there. And the last challenges with that is we just don't know, because now we are on distance, and it's much more difficult to really take the sense or take the pulse of the organization. So we're trying to bring some other exciting tools to really understand what's going on in the organization.
Great. And so you sort of talked about some of the technology, but how has technology enabled your efforts?
Well, it's a game changer, and it's a deal breaker at the same time. So technology is extremely important nowadays, and I like to say to my friends, I wish I had shares in some of those big companies, because now they are really booming. Yes, it's absolutely necessary. Everything we do now is technology enabled. So and sometimes it doesn't mean having a very fancy technology with very fancy functionalities. It's just having something that works. And it sounds trivial, but it's not always the case, especially when you are trying to have more people who can benefit. The way it enabled us is that in the past, when we design an intervention, is typically for a small number of people at a time. So we typically have 24 people, 25 people, sometimes a bit more, a bit less, etc., etc. But nowadays, what we can do is to have a learning intervention and have 150 people at the same time without compromising the learning, which is quite interesting. So I agree that it has enabled, very much enabled.
Great. I'll pass it on to Roger. Yeah, I just want to follow up. I love the enabled comment. I think one of the reasons why Candice and I ended up with kind of the slogan, keep learning strong, is that in these times, oftentimes when money gets tight, business situations change, the tendency is to retreat, right? Whereas I think this is a great opportunity, as you said, Sofian, where the situation is also dictating that folks get outside their comfort zone, and that they look at ways of learning that maybe they haven't welcomed or done as much before. So I think that's a great point. Really appreciate your sharing that. So, and then that kind of leads to would you do anything differently? I mean, now we've been in this social experiment now for a few months with the COVID. Would you do anything differently, that you've learned in those 2 to 3 months, or do you feel like you're pretty much on track with and making the right decisions along the way?
Yeah, it's always funny after a crisis how it sounds so obvious the things we could have done differently, right?
Yeah, yeah,
If
sooner,
we
right?
knew
It
about
reacted
that,
sooner. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But on our side, we, with the boundaries of my own self-awareness, um, I think we're pretty good. And the reason why I'm quite confident about the fact that we're pretty good is we benchmark a lot. We are very much in touch with a lot of companies that contact all the companies to try to understand what companies are doing, and they're quite impressed with our response to crisis from a company overall, but also from a learning standpoint. We haven't had any budget decrease or training freeze or anything as such. I think at all levels of my company, and I feel very privileged for that. We have the feeling that learning is extremely important, and even more so within this crisis. So from that standpoint, quite happy about what we're doing. If I had to go back 3 months ago or 2 months ago, I would have probably moved faster. I think it was, if I reflect, I think there was a tipping point where we knew there was a crisis. From now we know, and we need to move extremely fast in doing things differently. I think that period, we could have been a bit more faster to react. I think everybody was kind of shocked and, was more focused on the health of everyone than anything else. But I think the ability to bounce quicker is probably something I could do differently. Um, One of the things I'm quite proud on what we've done is we were somehow tempted to react extremely fast on pushing webinars and saying, hey, what are the 5, 6, 7 topics that leaders need at the moment, etc., etc. And then we said, well, let's wait for a minute. Let's not assume that we know what leaders need, and let's be collaborative. Let's engage in a dialogue with them to really hear from them what are the pain points at the moment. And I think that was something that if I had to do it again, I will do it again, because and I'm in touch with many L&D leaders across the world, and sometimes I feel like a lot of L&D people like to push things and assume that they know what is good and what is great, but sometimes it's also about pulling and hearing from the others.
Yeah, I love that as well. I think that's a great takeaway from our conversation so far, is that when in doubt, right, to certainly involve the end users and your employees and making those decisions as to what's critical is just it. It's amazing sometimes, I think, how many times that doesn't occur. So yeah,
Absolutely.
applause for having taken that step back and asked those questions.
Thank you. Absolutely.
And then have you come across during this journey, Sofian, any helpful resources, any advice that you'd pass on to our audience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, we're not lacking any resources in the world nowadays. So uh, I, I I would share some helpful resources, but also helpful maybe actions and experiences. I think and I'm extremely impressed by that. All the learning providers and all partners that we're working with have been extremely agile in adapting their content, their ways of, sometimes not always their technology, but their ways of delivering, their ways to stay relevant. And we benefited a lot from that. Reports, videos, and things that have to do with learning, but not only, things that have to do with the crisis itself, understanding what's going on, making sense of the world, etc., etc. So I think leveraging what's existing from our partners was a key thing. Then and I'm not here to mention name and maybe promote some key providers, but I think there are really some providers that have so much resources that from so many different global companies that they are really able to distill the knowledge into very simple insights. And those kind of, very digest reports were very helpful for us. It was helpful for learning how to do things, but also it was a way to look at ourselves and say, hey, we are not so bad. Actually, we're good. If you think at what others are doing, actually, we should be happy about this, because in a crisis, you tend to overreact and always feel like you're not doing enough. And sometimes it's good to pause and say, hey, we're good. We're okay. Let's keep doing it, but we're okay. We don't need to reinvent the whole wheel. So I think those reports were quite useful. Maybe with the caveat that more knowledge, knowledge is like water. When you're thirsty, you need water to drink, but after a certain threshold, more knowledge will not really help you. So I was having conversations with my colleagues, and I was trying to challenge on the fact that, do we need more knowledge, or do we need more action or more reflection? So what has been also very helpful for us is to bring people together in conversations, like in groups, and have facilitated very open conversations about this crisis, where people feel they can be vulnerable, they can share their challenges, but they can learn from each other. So for me, the takeaway here is there's much more that people can learn from each other than just by reading a report.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. And I think one of the things that you've been touching on a lot is just that taking time to reflect, because it is very new. So any actions that we take and the information that we're getting, there is a time to pause and see how things are working and to collaborate with others. So thank you for sharing that. And so as for you, what has helped you in your personal perseverance to be more resilient and agile during this time?
Yeah, so it's funny because I was traveling. I was in Europe for 3 weeks when this all started. So when I went back, I went home and I was with my son, and he was doing his homework from home. So I was trying to help with that. And at some point of time, I think he was getting a bit bored with the learning. So I start to become like a bit maybe too assertive and like, hey, you need to do your homework and you need to do ABC. And then I realized that, look, it's difficult for him as well. And I reflect, as you just mentioned, self-reflection. I reflected about, a day after that, and I was like, well, this approach to dealing with my kid is not going to help me survive in the next 3 or 4 months or whatever. So I really reflect and I say, what do I need to do differently to really thrive during that time? So instead of like pushing, what I was doing, and it's just with my son, but giving him more time to pause and to have fun, and less intense, half an hour to work, go and play for another hour, etc., etc. So that really helped me feel more more relaxed at home, I think. Other things has to do with exercising, and I'm not saying I'm doing enough, but I think taking the time to pause, take a walk, just walking the stairs and do some little micro exercise. Could it be like just 2-3 minutes just to refresh the blood? Is very good for the energy. One of the things that I recommend a lot of my colleagues and friends is I try not to look at the newspaper like 5 times a day, because it's just demoralizing. Yeah. It's not just good for the energy. So really, I watch the news quite frequently, but just to get insights about the situation. But I think reading too much of it is just, it can have an impact on people's emotions as well. And maybe lastly, and I think that is the blessing that I see in this time, is reaching out to people, to new people, but also to people I haven't touched base with for many years sometimes, And I try to have at least 3 times a week a call with an old colleague or business partner or a friend or, from a different place, and just, checking in on what's going on, how they make sense of this crisis, what are they doing, and sharing. And it happened to be really helpful for me, really, really energizing, I would say.
Yeah, those are all great examples and things that I think people can use. I too had, to shift to homeschooling and lots of trial and error, and realize that there's no way we're going to get through this if I, just don't remove the pressure, right? And just try to make it as fun as possible, because it is hard on them as well. And definitely share your sentiments. And I know Roger does too, with limiting the news.
Yeah. And I think it all boils down to the ability for people to reinvent themselves.
Yeah.
Challenge the assumptions and rules that they've always had. Mm-hmm. And I was able to do that with the way I look at learning for my son. But I think also in the workplace, our ability to say, this never worked, but actually it may work today. This always worked well, actually is not going to work with us in the next month, and maybe we need to stop doing it. I think that agility to kind of almost, forget what we've learned and unlearn that is key for professionals, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, there's a quote that we've been using for a while that just says the literate of the 21st century is not those who can't read or write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's really what we see as you're talking about, getting knowledge, sharing knowledge, and reflecting. That's the process, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big one, right? But from what you've learned to date, and it feels like a year to me, but I think 2 to 3 months so far, with COVID-19 and just this new reality that we're in today, what are some of the most important skills and competencies you feel need to be cultivated in the workforce today?
Yeah, I can see a couple of ones. I will say first and foremost, curiosity. I think the ability for all of us to keep having that drive to look at something new, and it could be something new within your current situation. Curiosity doesn't mean you need to travel around the world to look at very unique insight, but looking at your current situation, what are the new things that are happening? What are the new emotions that you're feeling? What are the new things you're hearing and reading, etc.? I think it is extremely important in general for professionals to be curious, but within this crisis, the ability to really look for the new is what driving progress in the world, but it's also, I think, what's driving innovation and adaptability. So I think it all starts with curiosity, because without curiosity, you're just stagnating. You're just happy with the current situation. In a crisis, doing that is not going to help you, right? So I would say curiosity is an important one. I would also say having a purpose, and I like to share this with a lot of L&D professionals as well, because it's not in all cases, but too often I see a lot of peers that start with an action and then start to think about the purpose of it. Yeah. So they start pushing things, and then they start to think, okay, how can we sell that? And for me, what I'm trying to have with my colleagues is, let's start about what we're trying to solve first and why we are doing those things, and then let's agree on the next steps based on that. During this crisis, if you don't have a purpose, what happens is you overreact to everything. You try to do everything at the same time, and you really need to think about your purpose as individuals, your purpose in life. But if you think about L&D professionals, what is our purpose? What do we need to deliver to the business? What is the value that we are adding versus what we are not doing as well? and having a clear purpose really helps you make some trade-offs. So yeah, I think purpose is important. Third one, and maybe I will quote a colleague, a friend of mine, the emotional agility, the ability to really bounce back and understand what you're experiencing inside, not ignoring it, not trying to, just push it somewhere, but really understand what's going on inside, and the ability to diffuse emotions and bounce back and use your emotions as a way to fuel your energy is extremely important. I've been talking about this for many years in executive leadership development. So in a very kind of a small setting with very selected group of people. But nowadays, these topics are becoming relevant for the whole mass of employees. The ability to manage emotions, manage energy, and there's a lot around mindfulness, et cetera, et cetera. We're not doing so much in there, but we're really trying to help people be present at work and build some simple habits, whether it's from sleep, from eating habits, from reflection, from social, etc., social interactions, to really help them. So I think that's very important.
That's great. Emotional agility. That's the first time I heard that, but it makes total sense. So I'll pass it on to Roger. Oh, I think you're on mute, Roger.
Sorry about that. I was on mute because of a barking dog. I bet we can all can relate to that sometimes, but my apologies. So, Sofian, you've shared a tremendous amount with us thus far, and we appreciate that. What are kind of your thoughts on what you're going to keep doing going forward, or what are you going to start doing that maybe you haven't even done yet, to kind of keep learning strong within your life and within your organization?
Hey, I think that's a good question. What I started to do very, very recently is really to try to challenge myself to learn things that are completely outside my area of interest. Knowing about financial models and things that are completely different, not randomly, because I want to learn things, to new tools to make more sense of what's going on in the economic world, etc. But the idea of really trying to push the boundaries of my interest and go to uncharted territories is an exciting one. I just started that, so I hope I'm able to reflect more in the coming weeks. But I think that's something I'll try to do more of. What are the things at the organization level? I think you communicating is, and again, it sounds trivial. You can never talk enough about communication, but I think in a digital world, you tend to assume that people have comprehended the information just because you sent an email, and that's not the case, because everybody is competing with your email in their mailboxes. So I think, and something maybe I haven't done enough, and I need to do a bit more of it, is really over communicating about what we are doing, what we want people to do, and what's going on. And I think that's very important under crisis. What we see sometimes, and I have a couple of examples, is leaders who are, usually very outgoing, very present, very engaged with their teams. During this crisis, they tend to retreat and be extremely silent. And so what we've tried to do is to really reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on in your space? What are the kind of challenges that you're facing? So I think for some of them, they tend to assume that, well, they just have a call with their direct reports, last week, and that's just good enough. But it's not enough, because the people at the shop floor, they need a lot of insights. They need to be reassured. They need to be part of a community. felt that they're being taken care of. So I think that is something where I can improve myself, but also help my organization improve as well.
That's great, and I couldn't agree with you more on some of those points. So I think at this point we're going to thank you once again, Sofian, for really spending, I think, some high quality time with us. In today's world, my feeling has always been that networks and reaching out and contacting people and becoming part of their networks and folks that you can go to for answers and sometimes just support was as important as anything in my career when I look back on it. So we're very proud to be able to add you to our network of people during these trying times. And everyone is, I think, shared a quote except me today. So I'm going to go to a standby that Candice will laugh at, but by Sir Richard Branson, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. Yeah. And I think in recent times, we can all relate to the idea that we've been pushed out of our comfort zones a little bit, and hopefully that'll equate to learning on all of our behalf. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Candice to wrap it up. And thank you again so much, Sophia.
Yeah, I
Roger.
share Roger's sentiment. So once again, thank you. And I'm just going to say to the folks who are watching, if you want to follow and connect with Sofian, you can do so through LinkedIn. His information is here. And also, we challenge you to just share the story, share the message of Keep Learning Strong. Our intention is for it to be inspiring and also, again, to promote learning and promote the professionals that make it happen. So share your story on LinkedIn or Twitter at Keep Learning Strong. Let us know what your organization is doing, or let us know. We've been in a very quote mood on this chat. So let us know one of your favorite quotes related to learning, and be sure to just keep up with us by following our Keep Learning Strong landing page, where we will share this video. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me with you. It was a pleasure sharing and also learning from you as well.
Absolutely.
Very good.